Okay, we're going to be finishing out the 14th book of Yisrayl, part 2, the special presentation all the way at the end on page 257, and that's entitled Kashak. I remember this sermon a long time ago. Of course, it was in the 80s before I came here, but I remember hearing it in the early 90s. I say the wee early morning of the 90s. Pastor talking about this. And the importance of it and what we need to work on developing in our lives. And underneath the word Kashak, it says, one of the very first sermons given by Overseer Yisrayl Hawkins that was recorded. This sermon was given sometime in the early 80s. The exact date is recorded in heaven. Okay, so you can't call and get a date on that if you're wanting one from the South Office, but you could ask for Kashak if it's still available. We have it available in written form here. It says, if you want to find true joy, then live by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh, as Yahweh tried to get Adam and Eve to do in the very beginning. Because Yahweh teaches love for others, and if you have love for others, if everyone had the love that Yahweh wants, one for another, there would be no problems in the world today. It would solve all worldly problems. And of course, we're going to cover that as we get into this sermon. But this is extremely, 80s, this was done in the 80s, but it's extremely fitting for our time period right now because we know as Matthew chapter 24, you can write down for your notes there, but I'll just read it. In Matthew chapter 24, we see here that in verse 12, and because iniquity, that is the breaking of Yahweh's law, will abound, the love of many will grow cold. And we're in that time period right now in the history of mankind. This is the history is being written. It was prophesied in Yeshua's time period. He made this prophecy, getting his information, his work from also the prophets. But we're living it right now. We're seeing this iniquity abound. It's abounding. There's pretty much no place on earth that you can go where it's not taught in some fashion. And because the breaking of Yahweh's laws are taught, the keeping of Yahweh's laws in effect are not taught, so those laws which bring forth love are not taught to the people, so they only learn war. They only learn hatred. They learn the mixture. And so you have this love that should be in a person's mind, this should be in a person's heart for their fellow man, for their parents, for their wife, their spouse, their husband, their children, the people that they interact with. Yeah, it's not there. It's grown cold. And so the only way to restore this or to establish it, I guess it should be because it was never fully established on the entire earth. So you had sin from the very beginning of mankind, is to get these laws of Yahweh taught. And that is our job. And we'll see a little bit of that here. Pastor just touches on it a small bit about our purpose and why Yahweh created us and what we really have to have our minds set on and focused on, kind of like the focus of a laser beam and how it's concentrated light, so concentrated that it can burn holes in things. And that's the way our focus needs to be in regards to the goals that Yahweh has set before us. Of course, Genesis 1:26, Matthew 6:33, and then we're going to read some of the things that Pastor brings forth here. But we're created to be a blessing to all the creation of Yahweh. We're not going to. It's not our goal to get in the kingdom so that we can be served and waited on hand and foot. We're going to be looking to serve and wait on others. We're going to be looking to guide and protect, to guard the food supply, to protect the life itself throughout all eternity. Because right now, the love that we see grown cold here on earth, it's multiplied maybe 100 or maybe 1,000 times in heaven, and it's chaos, absolute chaos there right now. Well, let's look at this first on page 259 here in your books. Pastor says, he says in, let me see here. In verse 2, he says, I've talked of love before and brought sermons on love, and it's one of the things that I guess is mentioned more than any other word, probably in the world, because it's brought out in songs and stuff like this, poems and everything throughout a person's life. And I want to go into that today and explain the different kinds of love that are spoken of in the Bible, or the words that are actually, they're translated love. And we look over here, look down to verse 4. And he says, but at this time Yahweh is allowing the spirit of Satan to work at full strength, because he talked about two ruling spirits, or two trees, the two ruling powers, the two ruling spirits that are influencing mankind. Is the same thing that has been from the days of Adam and Eve. We have all the way at this time period right now. Only two, either Yahweh or Satan. And so, as 1 John 3:4 and 7 through 8 shows, who we belong to, our heads, the ownership that is placed over us is made evident through our conduct, through our behavior. Who we, as Romans shows, 6:16, yield ourselves in service to obey. That those servants we are. And again, sin or righteousness. It was spoken of long before that in Deuteronomy chapter 30, when Yahweh said to choose you this day whom you will serve. So Yahweh's always left it up to us from the very beginning. This kingdom that he was putting together and the people that would make up this kingdom, they would enter into it and develop this character because of their desire to be like Yahweh. So it is by choice. Yahweh's not forcing anybody. He's not forcing the Malachim. He's not forcing Satan. Like I said before, if Yahweh was going to force everybody, everything would be perfect. It would be perfect. Because he just forced everything to just be perfect. But that's not what he wants out of his people. You actually find joy in choosing righteousness when we get to that point. You find joy in doing the right thing. You find joy in giving a fitting answer according to the law of Yahweh. That's where our joy comes from. But he says here, now your Bible, brethren, as I've said many times before, is the source of all knowledge. It's the source of all knowledge. And I don't care what kind of problem you have today, or what problems were in the history of mankind, every problem is covered in your Bible. Everything you can think of, you can find an answer to it in the Bible. Now, that might blow a lot of people's minds because you get your, highfalutin educated scholars from the schools of higher learning. I went to Yale, I went to Harvard, I went to Princeton. There's no way you can tell me that the problems that are contained that we have today can be solved by this book that was written thousands of years ago. They had different problems back then. Yeah, sure, you can take a few pages and write the answers to the problems. But the fact that we have problems, of course they don't understand this, it's evident that we've gotten away from the rules that this book has given, that this book gives from Yahweh to guide man to perfection, to guide man to peace, to guide man to health, to where he can have a long life. You see, at the very beginning, we went from 900-something years on down to 100-and-something years, and now it's blessed, a man's life is 70, blessed if you get to 80. The average lifespan and expectancy for a man, I think generally for the world, is 64 years for a man and 68 for a woman. That's not life. Life expectancy. They were just getting started whipping out babies at that time, and we're having them into their 200 and 300 years old. But because of this abounding of sin, we see these curses start to overtake the bodies and the minds of mankind. Again, the love, the kashak that we're going to cover is not there. Look at verse 5. But please understand that there are two different kinds of spirits, and they're just exactly opposite from one another. That's why the house of Yahweh is so much different from the churches and organizations that you see in the world today. Because Satan is ruling, she completely overpowers the people, and this was given to her as a gift from Yahweh, but it's now being used, of course, by Yahweh to build character in beings who Yahweh wants in his family. So we see all the way at the very beginning there in the 80s, where Pastor was talking about this character that Yahweh wants in his family, a character like his, where we could make similitudes and compare and consider and reason and apply that to the law that we have been taught, or compare that to the law that we have been taught and that's been drilled in our minds and we grew up with and so forth. and consider the rewards and the consequences for making one choice or the other, and then choose righteousness, choose life. Because we don't want to bring harm to ourselves. We don't want to bring the strength of the nations down or anything like that. We want peace, joy, and this abundant living. Look at verse 6. If a man will follow the ways of the Bible, he would find joy because Yahweh laid down a perfect plan in His Word. He didn't leave you to where those who want to live a joyous life and a perfect life cannot find it, because now notice what he says here. He set down the rules. He set down the rules. Yahweh gave rules to mankind in the Bible here to guide any individual to a completely joyous life. And as we're going to find out here as we get further into it, there is no hopeless case in the world. There is no hopeless individual. There is not a person that Yahweh could not, as remember he said to Yashub regarding Babylon, can you turn Babylon? You know, can you approach the behemoth or the the big beast? But Yahweh can. He is their maker. And He can turn the head of this beast. He can turn the head of anybody. And He's demonstrated it many times in the Holy Scriptures to open their eyes and give them a mind of understanding. That's what He does, gives them a mind of understanding. And then once they have that mind of understanding there, then they can see clearly to make a right choice. He didn't force them, but He just gave them a mind of understanding. So that's part of the problem that we have here in this world right now, is they don't have a mind of understanding, but Yahweh's not dealing with them right now. He's not calling them out. He's only calling those who He wants in His house to build His character, and that's what we have the opportunity to do right now, to build this kashak, this love, that we're going to get into more detail here, so that we can be like Yahweh in governing the universe. Look at verse 7 on page 260. But if all the world follow this way that Yahweh has laid down and let the Spirit of Yahweh guide them, then there would be total peace. Of course, Yachanan 6:63 tells us what that Spirit is. It's the laws of Yahweh. So look over to, we'll kind of move a little bit through this. This is a very long sermon. But he talks in verse 10 about this word, this English word that's translated as love. And of course, the Hebrew gives different definitions that is translated in Hebrew in different words, but the English rendition of it is love. Look at verse 12. He says, now, as I said, the English word for love, it covers several different things. Emotions and lust, caring, sex, even hatred. This English word covers. But now in the Hebrew, we have different words to describe the different emotions, the different feelings, the different aspects of what we prefer to call love. In verse 13, the word, for instance, the Hebrew word rahum, it means compassion, it means mercy, it means pity, and it's translated in your Bible, though, as love. So this is why you've got to understand the Hebrew, and the writers of this understood this when they wrote it, but they didn't write in English, remember? They wrote in the Hebrew language. So they put the appropriate word there, but the translators just translated it love. In verse 14, now the word agape, and I know many people have probably heard agape before. There's a lot of churches that use the word agape, and they talk about the agape love and things like that. But this means affection. Now, this is sexual or otherwise. It can be in a righteous sense or in a bad sense because it displays the sexual lust and what the psychiatrists call sadistic, where a person actually gets joy from hurting someone else. The other end of that spectrum is masochism, where a person actually gets joy or pleasure from being hurt. And this is usually applied to, illegal sexual lust and so forth. But of course, this doesn't tie. This is not the love that Yahweh is wanting us to develop one for another. And it's not just a man for his wife, but this is the love that we should have for one another that Yahweh is wanting to build within us. Let's look over to page 261 at verse 16. It says, now, actually back up here to verse 15. It says, I don't think this, this would be an old person. He talks about someone wanting to take a horny toad and stick a hot coal in it or try to pull his legs off. You find this in young people, but if you stop and think about it, this is not who Yahweh wants in you. The young people in their inquisitive minds and sometimes the cruelty there. And he said, this is why I think Yahweh worked with people when they got into their 70s and 80 years old, because they didn't have these pulls and these lusts and these emotions that were driving them. They had been through life and experienced the ups and downs, and they just wanted to get it right, so to speak. Now let's look at verse 16. Now the Hebrew word kashak, for instance, it's translated love in your Bible. Now this is the kind of love when one wants to cling to another. It's between married partners, and most of us experience this between man and wife. It takes place when you delight in being around another person. You just take delight and joy in that, just being around that person. It's actually to long for another person when they're not near you, when they're not around. You have a longing in your heart to be with them. This is kashak. In verse 17, and it wants to share things. Speaking of this love or this character, this feeling that you have, the individual wants to share what he has with someone else. This is kashak, and translated in your Bible, of course, love. That's true love, and it's a love that grows, and it can be between a man and a wife. It can be between a man and his friend, or a woman and a woman, or a woman and her friend, and it has nothing to do with sex or emotions. It's completely overruled. It completely overrules emotions and sexual feelings and things like this. But this is the love, this is the kashak that Yahweh has for you, for each individual, and he had this for you before you were even born. Okay, because he had us set in his plan, praise Yahweh, before the foundations of the earth, you remember, before the world, that we could be, through this adoption, become sons of Yahweh. And he had this love for us even when we were sinners, bringing forth a son who would never sin but suffer at the hand of sinners. He experienced sin, but not through his own hands, but through others. And with the end results of it and what it brought, who would actually qualify to die for us, because our first sin cuts us off and gets us rolling down that road to death. That's the love that Yahweh had for us. If he didn't have this kashak for us, and he had just the off-the-hook emotions for us, he would just be out like the movies have them, this mean old God of the Old Testament. Move out of the way, I'm going to destroy him, Moshe. In the fire and the thunder and everything coming from heaven, but that's not how Yahweh is. Yahweh's in full control of himself. You're not going to find Yahweh having a temper tantrum at any time. I guarantee you that. And we should be working on getting those things out of our character as well. But look at verse 18. The Hebrew word agape, it's a false impression of love, and it's more or less lip service. But it was translated in your Bible, love. Let's look over to page or verse 21. But this agape, as I said, it's a false impression of love. It's more lip service than anything else. It's a pretense of love. And you see this displayed in songs and poems. And he talks a little bit about some of the other poems that people wrote. Look at the bottom part of that. Let's see, is it the last sentence? After laughing there, it says, so I didn't know what kashak was at all, but he was experiencing the agape, which is ruled by emotions mostly, and it's usually used to get something or achieve something in life, achieve something from someone else, to benefit yourself instead of, all parties involved. Let's turn over to page 262. Because he talked a little bit about the people that came before Yeketskia in verse 33 and 31, Yeketskia chapter 33 and verse 31, and talk about how the people came before and set before them, but they didn't follow the instructions that the priest was given. They were sitting there listening, everything's great, but when it came out to go and put these things into practice, they were failing miserably because they weren't following them. Well, in verse 24, now kashak is what David had for Jonathan. If you remember that story, it's the deepest kind of love, the kind of love that grows between person and between person and Yahweh. And, of course, the Catholic Church wants to make out like David and Jonathan had a homosexual relationship, but I don't think that flew with the majority of the world because at least I hope they knew better. But Yahweh called David a man after his own heart. And he had this love for Jonathan, who was a great friend of his. He had the love for Saul, who sought his life, and David never once retaliated against that man. Look down a little further. It says, it overrules fear and lust, even hatred and abuse. It overrules this because if you have, we're still in verse 24, if you have the right kind of kashak, one for another, even though that person abuses you from time to time, you still have this love and it doesn't disappear. You got that? You see, we become a person of integrity in regards to this love that Yahweh says that we need to have. In fact, you can just write for your notes in Romans chapter 12, verses 14, 17, and 21. It talks about us holding fast these things and not retaliating, not wanting to retaliate against somebody when they strike out against us. I'm just going to read a couple of them here. Romans chapter 12, and I read verse 20. Ooh, I'm in the wrong one. Oh, there it is. Verse 17. It says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to be above reproach in the sight of all men. And of course, verse 14 says, bless those who curse you, bless and do not curse. And 21 says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with righteousness. So, we should never go out of our place, even when those men or people come and curse us and say all manner of falsehood against us. Yeshua told us in Matthew that we need to, hold fast and stand strong, and it's actually considered a blessing when they persecute us and speak all manner of falsehood towards us. Like the apostles went out jumping for joy when these things took place with them, when they were stoned and put in jail and things like that. That's the kind of character and the love we have to develop. Let's look at verse 30 there. Well, we won't read all of that, but Pastor is talking about how David was so pleasing to Yahweh because he had this love within him, and it's a love that actually grows very deep for another person. And if you remember the man who came after Saul and Jonathan were killed, and he said that he actually was responsible for Saul's death, thinking that he was going to get some type of reward because he was chasing David all over the place, that his King Saul was, and he actually brought his own blood upon his own head. Well, that's not the love that we should be seeking. Remember, as if to get something from someone else. That's that agape. That could be that definition of that agape falling into that category. But in verse 35, he says on page 263, just because a person is evil today and does a lot of wicked things to you, so keep that in mind what we just read in verse 24, a person abusing you from time to time, and they might hurt you in many different ways, is no sign that person may not be in the kingdom because he's not having his opportunity today. Not many of them are now. Many people aren't having their opportunity. In verse 36, so the person who is not called today, who doesn't have the understanding and doesn't grow and develop this kashak that Yahweh wants in each of us, that person will he'll have an opportunity to overcome. Of course, no one gets a second opportunity, but he says he'll have an opportunity to overcome. His mind will be open, and he may well be one of your brothers throughout all eternity. And that may very well be so. So we need to make sure that our mindset and how we interact with others, that we stay above reproach in the sight of all man. Let's look over here to verse 44 on page 263 at the bottom here. It says, now agape is also ruled by the desires that are created by a physical fashion in your body, in your physical body, and it's brought on sometimes by pure lust. Now, of course, we remember the example of Ammon, which was one of David's sons, who had this lust, it wasn't love, but it was lust, so great in his mind for his sister that the man actually got sick as a result of this. But you notice in none of that time period there did Ammon ever go to the priest and speak to the priest about this. He didn't, like the law tells him to do. What did he do? He went to a quote-unquote friend who gave him a great idea as to how to scratch this itch that was bothering him. And at the end of it, he hated the girl more than he lusted after her and threw her away to be despised. This is why we can't, we have to get that out of our lives because we've been trained in it. That's what society has trained us in, yeah. And develop this kashak that Yahweh wants for us to where we would rather protect another person in the house of Yahweh from harm than want to fulfill our own lust with that individual and bring harm to them. In verse 46, and it's not a thing but Satan's way of trying to destroy family life. It was finishing off there with Ammon. In verse 47 there at the top on the 264, just at that time when their children need them most, they want to get rid of them and push them out into the world. And of course we see these things with families of the world. They want to get their children out of the house. They want them to get out of their hair so they can focus on doing what they want to do. And Pastor he goes and talk a little bit about the children and the young minds and how they seem to be so influenced by the things that are coming forth from Satan. In fact, some of the things I looked up shows that 42 of the world's population right now is 24 and under. About 3 billion or so people. And so these influences that are designed to attract the minds of a malleable, formable mind is pushing in that direction to try to wipe out this family life that Yahweh has. He created to be in the very beginning because that brings benefits and peace and joy to all. The thing now is hooking up and, insta dating or quick dating or speed dating. All these things are designed to create and generate this lust in the person's mind to where, they don't care. They don't care about that individual. But the way the human body is that the body starts to form a bond with that other person, but then it's quickly broken off. So it throws the person's mind and their microorganisms into confusion, and then they start doing crazy things and making crazy decisions. They're looking for love, but they can't find it. And so we have STDs, we have abortions, we have murders that are taking place, we have wars, as Jacob said. It's because of these lusts that are in the members of your body. Well, we're going to finish up here. Let's go to page 266. Let's look at that last part or middle part in verse 59. He says, no matter how much Satan is influencing a person, if Yahweh wants to call that person, he can, and this is demonstrated throughout your scriptures. Look over to verse 64, the last part. It says, he's talking about the nations right now building the bombs, the great huge bombs, if you keep Jacob chapter 4 in mind. He says, and it's the reason that the young people are making so many mistakes in their lives as well as old people. As I said, it goes from young to old. And you can put down these emotions and live exactly as Yahweh tells you and avoid all the foolish things and the hurt that will take place in your life. Or the other option is you can yield to them and accept the spirit of Satan within you, and that's exactly what it is, and go through all the hell and torment that thousands of people just like yourself down through history have gone through. So, of course, Yahweh, again, leaves it totally up to us to make the decision if we want to develop this kashak love that is deeper than any emotional love or lust that could be between a man or a woman or anybody else, or continue to go along with the world where this iniquity is abounding and this love is growing cold. But to continue in this sermon, if you'll all please stand, turn it over to the great Kohan Levi.
Shalom, everyone. Please be seated. As the previous speaker said, there's so much to go through in this sermon. I want to touch on one thing, though, before we really get into it, because Pastor made mention of something, and just in case I don't get to it at the very end, but he was talking about what the world is looking for, and he was saying that the world is seeking happiness. And he said, really, that should be Yahwehness. Not happiness, but Yahwehness. And we'll touch upon that a little bit more as we go on into the sermon. But let's start on page 16, not page, but verse 69. We're on page 267. And here Pastor is talking about the spirit of Satan that she starts feeding everyone, and in the middle of verse 69, it shows that she accepted a certain spirit, and this is the spirit that she puts in every man today. When that child is born, then Satan starts feeding him this spirit and does every single person on the face of the earth. Now, the only way you can get rid of this spirit is to repent and allow Yahweh's spirit to come in and push the other one out. And this is something that we have to do continually, because if we slack off from developing Yahweh's spirit, then there's only two. There's either Yahweh's or Satan. So if Yahweh's spirit is not growing or increasing, then you have the other spirit that is growing and increasing, and that's the one that we don't want. Now in verse 70, of course, Yahweh is using Satan's spirit to build character in man. He is using this as a means to show man, or for man to show him, that he will resist the spirit of Satan and fully know that this spirit of Satan is what causes all the trouble in the world, and fully realize that by getting rid of this spirit, then Yahweh brings the true joy to this world, the true love that this world is hunting for and running away from all the time. Now, this true joy, and this is what he was talking about in the sermon earlier, is that the world is searching for this true joy. They use the word happy, and we know that goes back to the worship of the gods, and that's why Pastor said earlier on in the sermon that it's really Yahwehness that they're searching for. And that's, to me, is such a beautiful word, Yahwehness. And this is on page 6, not page 6, but verse 6. And he says that, actually, it comes from the joy of Yahweh, talking about people looking for a joyous life. And you could say, instead of happiness, it's probably Yahwehness that people are searching for and don't know it and should and would eventually find it. So this is what people are searching for. They're searching for true joy. Now, when you look into the meaning of the words, what is this joy that they're looking for, or what the world think that, they want to be happy and etc. What they're looking for is true pleasure and delight. They're looking for satisfaction. There's a certain satisfaction that they're looking for, but they can't find that satisfaction outside of the laws of Yahweh, because outside of Yahweh's laws, there's no satisfaction. It's a continual seeking after vanity. But within the laws of Yahweh, there is satisfaction if you search for it and if you begin to understand what it is and what it's supposed to bring and so forth. And there are a lot of things that you shed along the way, and we'll cover some of them in the sermon, as you seek after this joy that Yahweh promises to give us, and we should have. Now let's look at verse 75, and here it's speaking about Satan again. With your wisdom and with your understanding you have gained riches for yourself, and you have gathered gold and silver into your treasuries. Did you notice the same spirit is in the world today? What's the world seeking after most of all? Is it not gold and silver, deceitfulness of riches? This is Satan's spirit. This is what she wanted. Why? Did you ever wonder why Satan would want something like this? It's to bring her power among the people. If Satan can get the world to seeking after this, and then she can accumulate it, she gets power. Money buys things. Money can buy you power. Many people have been put in high offices with money. So this is what Satan has put into the mind of the world at this time. Instead of seeking the satisfaction that comes forth from keeping the laws of Yahweh, they're trying to seek satisfaction through riches, through seeking after money. Of course, Solomon wrote thousands of years ago that he who seeks after silver is never satisfied with silver. So there's no satisfaction that comes forth from seeking after riches and so forth. Look at verse 78. By your great wisdom in your trading, you have increased your riches, and your heart is lifted up because of your riches. Verse 83. By the multitude of your merchandise, they have filled the midst of you with violence. Notice what this brought now. This spirit of Satan, this is what it brings. Anytime you turn from the way of Yahweh to the way of lust or emotions, this is what it brings. It brings forth violence. Well, the violence doesn't come about immediately. It starts off with a hatred. And the hatred doesn't come about immediately. It's preceded by that dissatisfaction, not being content. It is preceded by bitterness. It's preceded by complaining, just not being satisfied with anything. And of course, then it leads to the hatred and eventually leads to the violence. Look at verse 87. Now in Yahweh you find a different spirit, and this is a contrasting spirit. And I could spend hours on this, but if you will keep this in mind in your Bible studies, you will see a totally different spirit from Yahweh than you find in Satan. Satan's spirit is filled with lust, with get, with gain, with accumulate, and so forth. And when you really start thinking about what Satan has put into the minds of mankind, you realize that mankind is set up for failure following Satan because they will never be satisfied. It doesn't matter how much they own. It doesn't matter how much they earn. There is no satisfaction because they want to accumulate more. They want to get more. They want to have more. There is no, well, okay, this is satisfactory enough, I have enough. No, it's get more, get more, get more, accumulate more, and etc. Sometimes you see it in this local area that people have accumulated so much they can't even park in the garages anymore because the garages are filled with stuff. So they park the vehicle outside so it could get damaged by hail and so forth. And that's why you have so many of these storage sites all over the place, because what they can't keep in their houses, then they have to go rent storage so they could put all this stuff that they have accumulated. They're not using it anymore, but they can't bear to part with it because it's something that they have gotten. And this is what Pastor is talking about here. He says, one guy wrote me last week and he said, it's so hard to get rid of the stuff that have accumulated over a period of years. And that's what you see in the minds of people right now, so they go rent all these storage areas and they put all the stuff that they have accumulated because it's so hard for them to part with it. He says they become a burden to you. Well, I found this out years ago. A man can get so much stuff, he can accumulate so much stuff until he becomes a slave to it. And you spend all your time trying to take care of the stuff you've accumulated. I don't care what it is. I've seen people who have been slaves to dogs. They keep accumulating dogs more and more and more. They develop a love for them. He said he saw the same with cattle, with sheep, with goats, with objects, with a woman collecting butterflies in a house. Yes, a person can become a slave to anything, and he's showing that this is this accumulating, just trying to accumulate things just to have it for having its sake. That is the spirit that Satan has put out there. So you would find that there's no satisfaction because as soon as you get it, you have it for a while, then the newness of it and the interest in it begins to dwindle, then it's put aside and now you're lusting after the next new thing because there's always something bigger to get, there's always something better to get, there's always something a little bit more fancy than the last one that you had and so forth. So there's never that satisfaction with what you have. So you're always seeking after something else. And of course, that's vanity. That's the vanity that Solomon spoke about. Verse 90, don't let yourself fall into these traps, brethren, because it's a trap of Satan. I'm not telling you not to have something, This is not the point. Don't let it get the best of you. And this is really what we have to be mindful of. It's not that, sometimes, in sermons and in messages, we may speak about the deceitfulness of riches, and sometimes in the minds of people, it's like, well, they're saying, or the priest is saying that we shouldn't have anything. No, the priest is not saying that. It is saying, what the priest is saying and what Yeshua said is that if you seek this above Yahweh, then that's what you're going to serve, because you can't serve two owners. You can't serve riches and you can't serve Yahweh. You could only serve one or the other. And this is what we all have to be mindful of, and we have to govern our lives accordingly. Look at verse 91. Kashak is what true love is. This is what true love is between man and wife. True love, brethren, is not finding someone to make you happy or to make you joyous. True love, and this goes against what the world teaches, because Hollywood and books and movies and everything portrays that you need to find that one special person that will solve all of your problems. If you just find that person, you're going to be happy until a divorce. That's how it goes in the world. But this is what Pastor is saying. True love, brethren, is not finding someone to make you happy or to make you joyous. True love is when you have joy. Notice the difference. You're not looking for it on the outside. True love is when you already have it and you're wanting to share it with someone else. That's what Pastor said here. True love is when you have joy and you want to share it with someone else. But what is it that you want to share with someone else? Well, it's the keeping of Yahweh's laws. That's what you really want to share with someone else, the keeping and the upholding of the laws of Yahweh. That's where the true love is located at. And this world is so stupid that they got it so mixed up that they think they want their children to go out and find someone to make them happy. About the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. No one can make you joyful. It's got to come from Yahweh and within your own self. Many people find this out the hard way. That's why I said, they go out trying to find that special person, and then they divorce that special person. The one that they thought that that is just going to solve all the problems in their life. And we have to be aware of this, that, again, we have to have that joy within ourselves so that we would be capable of sharing it with someone else. But somebody else can make you very miserable if you don't have the joy and the kashak you should have before you become involved with a mate. And you'll find that out one day. If you don't believe me now, believe me, if you get mixed up without finding this joy first in your own self, then you're going to find the miseries that come with the marriages of this world as they turn out day after day after day. Our first love in the house of Yahweh should be the laws of Yahweh. That should be our first love. That's what we should be joined to. And what that does, when we have the love of Yahweh's laws, it gives us a certain amount of stability within our lives that enable us to weather the storms, the troubles, the trials, the travails, the ups and the downs, and everything that goes on with daily life or living with someone else, and etc. You're never going to be totally thrown off balance once you have the love of Yahweh's laws within you and the love of the message and so forth. But if you don't have that, or it's not firmly established or rooted there, then of course when the ups and the downs, and this is what Pastor was talking about when he was mentioning agape, that emotional type love, well, if that's all you have, then it could change from minute to minute. It could change from day to day. It could be like what the world does. You get this flower petal, and one minute you love this person, the next minute you don't. You love them, you don't love them. You love them, you don't love them. But that's not the love of Yahweh. That's not the true love that Yahweh wants us to have. The true love of Yahweh is a steady type love that could endure trouble. It could withstand difficulty. It's stable and it's steadfast. That's the type of love that Yahweh wants us to develop, and that's the type of love that you see within His laws, and that's the type of love that gives you endurance in the house of Yahweh. That's what allows all of us to keep going through the same thing day after day after day, knowing that there is a change that is coming and better days are ahead. Now Yahweh, verse 93, Yahweh shows kashak, or true love, to mankind. Let's go to Genesis 1:29. Notice how he gives this. He's a servant to man. He created man, and then he was a servant to him, giving him this and that. He must have been the joy of Yahweh completely, because Yahweh continually served man there and serves man today. You know, as I was preparing for this class, one of the things that stood out to me is that I saw how attached Yahweh is to mankind. And I know we don't really think about it in that fashion, but Yahweh loves us. Yahweh has that true love for each and every one of us in the house of Yahweh. There's a certain attachment that Yahweh has to the house of Yahweh. That's why we are called a special treasure. That's why we are also called a peculiar people. But that's the love that Yahweh has for us. And there are so many things that Yahweh do for us on a daily basis. One day He will be able to show us all the things that He has done for us, and we'll be so amazed. Turn to Psalm 8. Because I know at times, because of our tests, our trials, our difficulties, and because of Satan's deception, sometimes we start thinking, well, Yahweh is far. Yahweh is beyond the third heaven. He is so far away from me, I don't even know where Yahweh is at right now, because that's how far Yahweh feels from me. But really, it's the opposite. Yahweh is very near to us, and He has a great love for us. In Psalm 8, verse 4, what is man? And I want you to think about that love, that care, that concern that Yahweh has, and that what Pastor was talking about, how Yahweh serves mankind, and it was the joy of Yahweh to serve us and to serve mankind. And He says, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? If you look at this word mindful, it's word number 2142. It comes from the word zakar, and it means to remember, recall, call to mind, be thought of, be brought to mind, to mention, to record. So we are always in the mind of Yahweh. We are always in His remembrance. As a matter of fact, another scripture shows that His eyes and His heart is here with us every Sabbath and feast days. So when you start looking at the scriptures and you start piling verse upon verse, you could see that, yes, we are greatly loved by Yahweh. And Yahweh has that true love for us. Now, Yahweh's love, and Pastor made mention of it, is not the emotional love. It's not the Christian type love. You sin and you perish in that instant because of a transgression. No, Yahweh could bear with us, and He could tarry with us, gives us space to overcome, to change, and to grow, and to become more like Him. That's the character of Yahweh. It's not Yahweh's character that you do something and instantly He's angry, and now He's just wanting to destroy you because you're just such a miserable lowlife. That's not Yahweh's character. Yahweh is patient. He's merciful. He's compassionate. He's long-suffering. Think about all these righteous attributes that Yahweh has. And He's not just saving it to Himself. He's applying it to us, His people. That's the Yahweh that we serve. Continuing on here in Psalm chapter 8, verse 4. So, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? And this word visit is word number 6485, and these definitions I'm reading from Brown Driver and Briggs and also Strong's Hebrew Concordance. It means to attend to, this word visit. So Yahweh attend to us, visit, appoint, look after. So Yahweh is looking after us. It also means to care for. So Yahweh is caring for us. It means to pay attention to. So Yahweh is also paying attention to us. It also means to observe and to be watched over. And yes, Yahweh is also watching over us. So yes, we are the primary concern of Yahweh. We are the only ones, and when I say we in the house, but by extension, we know that that goes out for mankind because there's a plan that is being worked out. But what I'm striving to show is the love that Yahweh has for each and every one of us in the house of Yahweh. It's an enduring love, and just bear that in mind. Keep it in mind, especially as we move forward in time and we see a lot of the prophecies being fulfilled. Look at verse 98. Now, Yahweh's way is the way of work and service. That's what Yahweh did. Maybe that's the reason you see so much of it around the house of Yahweh today. Now, this is not something that people desire because we don't have that in the carnal mind. What do we think the carnal mind thinks most of all? It thinks the way to true joy is to lay on your back and do nothing, doesn't it? Well, that's the joy of the world, just to kick back and drink beer and to kick back and do this and, well, do nothing actually. Kick back and watch television, kick back and watch the DVDs, kick back in the movie theaters and so forth. But that's the spirit of Satan, wanting to do absolutely nothing. It's really a spirit of laziness. It thinks it thinks the way to true joy is to lay on your back and do nothing, doesn't it? Go on a nice beach and you're just laying back on the sand doing absolutely nothing. That's what the life is all about. Well, no, that's not what the righteous life is all about. That's what the carnal life is all about. And these are things that we have to root out of our minds. These carnal concepts. We have to get rid of these images that has been put there by the adversary and by marketing executives who wants to sell us vacations to some Caribbean island and stuff like that. So these are some of the things that we have to be mindful of. And this is what Satan has the whole world believing. Come up to the altar and be saved, then you're going to go to heaven, and you'll have this cloud to float around on throughout all eternity with nothing to do. Just all eternity floating in a cloud doing nothing. I don't know how people don't see through that yet. That would be the most boring existence ever. Just floating around in a cloud and doing absolutely nothing for all eternity. Let's look at verse 100. But before this, Pastor was talking about the true kashak that you've experienced here work, and he says, but this is Yahweh's spirit. It's a way of work. It's the way of service. That's what love is. The very most joyous people I know are people who work. They're workers. Think about it for a moment. That's who Yahweh is. How do you think all these planets got here in the first place, the earth and so forth? Yahweh was just kicking back, relaxing. He wasn't thinking about doing anything. And all of these things just popped up just like that. No, that's not the way it occurred. Yahweh worked to bring these things into existence. And he brought it into existence for mankind. And he set mankind on the earth and started taking care of them, teaching and so forth. Verse 1 or 2. What brings joy is being busily at work in Yahweh's service. Being busily at work in Yahweh's service. And sometimes it could be a little bit overwhelming, especially when you get heavily involved in the work and you're being called from every side and demands is placed on you from every angle. But you have to remember why you have committed yourself to this way of life, because there's a certain satisfaction that comes from serving others and doing things for others. As a matter of fact, this is what people learn in the world when they go out and they volunteer for the community and they start assisting in certain programs and so forth. They find that to be most satisfying when they help others. And this is what Yahweh trains us in the house of Yahweh to experience. But it's something that has to be experienced. It can't be learned any other way because we don't have the desire like Satan puts in the mind, the desire to do nothing, the desire to get out of everything we can. And we have to be on guard of this, because, sometimes we can't commit ourselves to the work of Yahweh and we can't commit ourselves to certain duties. And then we lose sight of why we committed ourselves to all the various responsibilities that we have. And then the spirit of Satan starts creeping back in. And how do you know the spirit of Satan starts creeping back in? Because then you're trying to get out of your duties, and you're trying to get out of your responsibilities, and you're trying to get away from this, and you're trying to get away from that. And before you know it, you're not doing anything. You're not doing anything. You're not doing anything to benefit somebody else. So you have to watch out for that, because that's Satan's mindset. the desire to get out of everything we can. This is coming from Satan. And the people who do this are the most miserable people on the face of the earth. So what did Satan do? She created them entertainment to keep them from knowing how miserable their lives are. She created you a television set so you will have something to do, but you will not have to move to do it. How stupid can it be? So you just sit in front of the television and you vegetate, or you sit in front of, you just hold up the cell phone and basically do the same thing. And the world has fallen for this trick, brethren. They have fallen for the spirit of Satan, and pretty soon their lives are gone, their minds are rotten. Let's look at verse 106. But this is not Yahweh's way. Yahweh's way is a way of joy. And remember that there's a pleasure and satisfaction that comes forth from keeping and upholding the laws. It's a way of service to others. This is Yahweh Himself, and this is what He puts in you. When you receive the true spirit of Yahweh and it starts growing in you, brethren, you are going to want to work. Not only just working on building character, but build for other people and do things for other people. And you're going to want to share this joy with everyone who comes along. This is all you're going to be talking about. And this is what we have committed ourselves to. This is the forever that we want. We forever want a part of Yahweh's work. We forever want to be in the house of Yahweh, but as a working member of the house of Yahweh, not just being here for being here's sake, but as a working member of the house of Yahweh. And what you have to think about also is, when do forever start? When do forever start? Is it going to start when you enter into the kingdom? No, forever starts now. When you have made that vow to Yahweh that you're going to serve Him, that's when forever started. Because that's the promise that Yahweh has given to us. And it's a promise that's unique to us, that in Psalm 118, He says, we will not die, but we will live. And that has only been promised to this generation. So our eternity, if we maintain the crown that Yahweh has given to us, has already started. So just think about it. It's for us to keep, or it's for us to lose. That's the choice that we have. Let's continue on here. I see that I'm rapidly running out of time. On page 271, I'll just summarize this. It shows that sin looks desirable, but all it brings is just misery and suffering. And you can see this in verse 117, following Satan's way. And then in verse 118, it shows the curses that mankind, following the ways of Cain, has brought upon himself, and ever searching for peace in verse 119, but never finding the true peace and joy that comes from upholding and keeping the laws of Yahweh. Let's look at verse 129. We are shown that we are given a very small portion of Yahweh's Spirit when we were first called, and He opens our mind to see the importance of His laws and the misery that Satan's ways bring. Then upon baptism in verse 130, you get a different spirit. Rather, it's the same, but a different gift. This Spirit Holy starts growing within you. This Spirit Holy starts changing you, giving you strength and comfort and so forth. This Spirit Holy is the one that if we let it grow, then eventually it takes over our whole lives, our whole being. Then we have the character, the same character that Yahweh has. This is the spirit that man is searching for now, because it brings joy, it brings gladness, it brings peace of mind, but the world is running away from it because they are running away from Yahweh. Further on in verse 134, he talks about the faith and what our forefathers were seeking, showing that they were seeking the kingdom of Yahweh. They were seeking to develop Yahweh's character. They were seeking Yahweh's government. And let's continue to the last page. And in verse 138, Pastor says, now how do you get this? Yeshua gives you the answer. It says, seek, in Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of Yahweh. The kingdom of Yahweh is a ruling government, It's a government that rules your life, and Yahweh says, rather what Yeshua is actually saying here is submit yourself to the government of Yahweh. Do this first, learn the joys that come with this, and then you will have something to offer to someone else. This is true love. So learn Yahweh's way. Be fully invested in Yahweh's way, and then we'll be able to offer that to someone else, which is true love. As I said, I say again, love is not finding someone to make you joyful. Love is finding the kingdom of Yahweh, the Yahwehness, and wanting to share that with someone else. This is true love. So may Yahweh bless your understanding.